Today on Midnight Monster, we talk about what is the scariest experience you've had in your life that you believe can only be attributed to the paranormal. I have 10 hand-picked stories that we will get into. If you've ever had a paranormal experience, make sure you comment yours down below. And let's get started with story 1. Before my dad died a couple years ago, one of his mantras was, "You are loved." He'd say it to us all the time. At his funeral, I ended my eulogy having the audience say, quote, "You are loved," in his honor. So, it's an important phrase for me in my father's memory. Now for the freaky part. I saw a thread on Reddit where OP was grieving, and I shared a story about my dad and gift he'd given me. A bag of silver stones with cheesy compliments engraved on them. He'd written a note about how, when he was younger and just striking out on his own, he and his buddies had talked about how nice it would be to have a compliment vending machine that would give you words of encouragement whenever you needed it. He concluded by saying, quote, "Anytime you need a pick-me-up, pull out a stone and imagine me saying it." So, I leave the comment and I immediately got a reply and said, "You are loved." I was shocked. Once my brain restarted itself, my first thought was, maybe they know me. So, I checked out their comment history to see if I could figure out who they were. Turns out, it was a bot. It had been programmed to randomly select one comment Reddit-wide every few seconds and left the comment a random compliment. So, out of a million of possible comments, this bot randomly selected not just my comment, but the one comment where I shared a personally meaningful story about my dad and random compliments. And then, it randomly selected a compliment that was super meaningful to my dad and our family. It honestly felt like my dad's spirit commandeered a Reddit bot to tell me, hey. It still gives me chills to this day, and the sheer astronomical odds of that happening the way it did astound me. Around 8 years ago, I was in vacation with my parent and my cousin. My sister could not come as she had just started her first job, so she stayed home by herself. When we were children, both my sister and I used to be really close, mainly because we shared room for my first 7 to 9 years. We used to have our code with taps for asking things like, "Are you already asleep? Are our parents asleep?" Stuff like that. She is also always doing something or looking for something to do, always being the first up. So when she was up and wanted me to wake up, she would place her face as close to mine as possible and just stare at me. I don't know for how long she would stay like this, but I can clearly remember multiple times waking to her doing this. I, of course, would shout or at least panic until realizing it was her. I guess it was fun for her, and I have to admit, I also did it a couple times. So, now, we're on our trip and it's been at least 10 to 12 years since the last time my sister pulled this prank on me. My sister and I are not as close as we used to be. We have certainly grown a little apart, but we still love each other. It was the last night in our trip before heading back to our city. And we had to just find this nice hotel close to the pyramids in Palenque, which meant no cell phone service. We were sharing a room, my mom and dad in the first bed, and my cousin and I in the other one. At some point, around 4 a.m., I woke up to some old sensation that someone is staring at me, so I opened my eyes and I could clearly see a face. My immediate reaction was to shout, waking my mother up. I have to say, this sensation is really scary, but years of experience with my sister waking me up like this took the threat away. So, despite of my shouting, I wasn't scared. It was just too familiar. My mom turned on the light and asked me what just happened. I told her that I was pretty sure my sister had just woken me up. I don't know if it made any sense, but I felt like it was her. Though, I cannot say I saw her face. I just saw a face and then it disappeared immediately. My mom is really superstitious, so she could not sleep after that because she felt something was odd and I couldn't sleep thinking of my sister. Later that day, in the morning, we noticed we all had lots of missed calls. My sister was involved in a really bad car accident. Luckily, she only had minor injuries. To this day, I don't know how to make out this experience. My brain tells me it was just a coincidence. On the other hand, it's the only way I could have thought of my sister while sleeping. It was just so real, in between both of us. As an extra, on our previous trip, my parents, my sister, and I, at the ruins, we could hear some drums. My parents said that it was raining and we were playing with the pawns, and at some point the drums started playing. Our curiosity made us follow the sound, getting us deeper and deeper into the jungle. I can't remember why we stopped, but when we finally made it out the exit and asked the security guy about the music, he said, quote, "So, you heard the drums as well?" He then proceeded to tell us that a lot of people heard them at a different time, and they did not know where the source of it was coming from. I was staying the night at a friend's house when I was about 13. We were watching The Shining with her older sister and another friend when I saw a black figure in my peripheral vision. I turned my head all the way to the right and watched this solid black figure in the shape of a man wearing a cowboy hat walk from one side of the house to the other. I didn't say anything to my friend when this was happening. I thought maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me because of the movie that we were watching. It was scary. After the movie, my friend's sister and others all left to a different house or to stay somewhere else. My friend's parents were out of town. In the middle of the night, I woke up to someone stomping up the staircase towards the room we were sleeping in. We thought maybe her sister had just come home and was running upstairs to bed. We went to check and found no one. We heard the stomping a few more times and then a really loud bang on the wall between our bedroom and the outside house. On the second story, my friend looks me straight in the eyes and says, "Did you see that man earlier?" I swear no one else was home and my friend was just as terrified as I was. We hid under the blankets and did not come out until we could see sunlight. This isn't my only encounter with unexplained paranormal. My dad's house when I was a kid was scary to say the least. Haunted, if you believe that kind of thing. We used to see a man in a military uniform in the long hallway leading towards my brother's room. The security alarms would go off for no reason, like someone was opening and closing the door over and over again. And one time, we had a decorative plate just fly off a shelf and hit a mirror clear across the room. I don't know if I would say the only possibility is paranormal, but it was damn weird. I've had several dreams similar to what I'm posting. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years since I was 6, and I've been to a lot of caves. I've never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end, it would always turn left and I would see a bent red stop sign at the end. Like someone just ripped it off at the top 2 feet and then tossed it in. But I always followed that corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down into a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom, and I saw my family, each with one thing, being tortured and killed. Every single time, and I could never do anything about it. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more than saw everything. Then they would turn and look at me, and I would wake up. Not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out like I was not supposed to be there. So, I have this dream multiple times a year until I turn 15. My father decides to take us to some caves we've never been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop was roughly 30 feet rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground and I started to feel uneasy, though I did not know why. So, I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down. And when I looked up, I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner. And I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have said some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I immediately managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left, never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened, just said I was not feeling well and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it constantly, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear when I think of it. When I said I never talked about it, I meant never talked about the experience in the cave. I did mention my dream to a friend years before we ever went to Dog Drop. Saw some people talking about looking up the cave and visiting. I just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to a local group. If you belong to another group but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to a local before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try to rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did do that, and yes, they died. I grew up in a haunted house, so spooky things happened all the time. And the absolute scariest thing that ever happened, unfortunately, happened about once a week. If you were sitting in our living room, you could see straight down our hallway to my bedroom door. It was pretty dark at the end of the hall, but you could usually make out the doorway and the doors on either side. And the pictures and the things hanging on the wall, well, when the dark came, however, it was like someone dropped a black curtain over the entire hall. You could still see about halfway down, but beyond, you might as well be looking into the black hole. When the dark came, it was always accompanied by this intense, uncomfortable feeling of being watched. Our family's 3 dogs would stare down into that hallway and growl. Occasionally, one of them would get brave enough to walk a little closer, but they always came back slowly out like they were afraid to turn their back at the dark. After a little while, usually a few minutes to half an hour, the darkness would suddenly disappear and you could see again. Sometimes, however, it would linger all night, and since nobody wanted to walk through the dark to get to the bedrooms, my whole family would be stuck in the living room all night. And just in case some people are interested, the first few times it happened, we did turn on the hall light and try to see what was down there, but as soon as we turned it off, the dark came back. The dark came pretty frequently, once a week or so. It was rare that the dark lingered more than a few minutes. It was easier just to wait 5 minutes before going down the hall than was to muster the courage to charge headfirst into that darkness. We only got stuck in the living room all night maybe 2 or 3 times, and it wasn't like we were huddled there in fear. We all just sort of passed out in front of the TV waiting for the dark to lift. Probably we could have all just turned on the light and ran for the rooms. But as an 11-year-old girl, I certainly was not brave enough to try that. As for everyone else wondering why we did not just move, well, it was our home. Moving is difficult and expensive, and honestly, it was not worth it. Understand, weird stuff happens every day, but it was most likely little things that were easy to ignore. The really scary stuff was rare and not enough to send us packing. A few years ago, the day before my birthday, I had a really weird dream. I was in my mother's kitchen with my mother, duh, only there were no walls and just a dark expanse all around. I walked up to her and asked, "So, how did he die?" She replied, "He woke up dead." I woke up at that point around 4:30 a.m., according to my phone, and wrote this down in my dream journal that I keep beside my bed, which I was keeping at the time in an attempt to spur lucid dreaming. It wasn't successful. My first lucid dreaming occurred entirely by accident 2 months ago. Anyways, a few hours later, maybe after 8, the sun was going down, my brother called me, crying, and said Uncle S was dead. Apparently, my aunt woke up around 6 to wake him up for work as usual. only to find him blue-faced and cold in the bed next to her, choked in his own vomit. This was completely unexpected death, and he had no medical conditions that would have worried my aunt, his sisters, or his mother. Never mind the rest of the family. Even the autopsy came back inconclusive. They couldn't figure any reason, medical, neurological, or chemical, as to why he suddenly puked in his sleep and did not wake up from it. Though, my aunt did say that the coroners estimated he's been dead 2 hours by the time she got up, right around the time I woke up from the woke up dead dream. My dad used to work at the local library. Oftentimes, he would stay until late working when no one was there but him. One day, he told me he would hear loud crashes upstairs after close when only he was there, but when he would go look to see what had fallen, there was nothing out of place. He told me about this, and we decided to go take pictures and ask questions while using a digital audio recorder. The following happened on 2 separate occasions. One night, while using the recorder, we asked a standard slew of questions and eventually headed home and listened back to the recordings. At some point in the recording, a whisper could be heard saying, 1 and 1 is 2. I never knew what that meant, but it was just the 2 of us there, so I always assumed that the voice was referring to us. On another night, we were sitting on the main floor in some chairs using the recorder and asking questions. One of the questions I asked was, "Do you like books?" Right after I finished asking the questions, we heard an unusually large crash behind us. We were pretty unnerved and decided to just leave. This was a Saturday night and the library was closed on Sunday, so we went back to the library the next morning to see what had made that noise. A couple of rows of books behind where we've been sitting was on the floor. Laying open and face down, I picked the book up and the first word on the page I could see was our last name. The book also had the word murder in the title. We were sufficiently freaked out. My dad and I have always been interested in the paranormal. He has some good stories as well. The library he worked at used to be a train station. I had always assumed that the strange things that happened may have been related to that. For several years, I experienced what is commonly called sleep paralysis. The first experience was one of the most terrifying. I was taking a nap on Christmas Day. I had the common experience of visceral buzzing in my ear/head, and a feeling of terrible evil coming upon me. I awoke, but couldn't open my eyes or move a muscle. I then felt something grab onto my feet and start crawling up my body. I felt completely overcome with evil. Finally, I pushed it all back and opened my eyes and found myself all alone. Similar experiences happened for years, each terrifying but almost became commonplace. I discovered that it was sleep paralysis, and someone said the best way to deal with this was to give in to it and not fight it. One day, I was taking a nap in my bed in the basement. My brother was a couple rooms down in our entertainment room. I felt that familiar visceral buzzing and my eyes opening, but I couldn't move. I decided to let go this time and I gave in to it. As soon as I had done that, my body started to sit up. I saw my arm raising and one thought dominated my mind. I had to kill my brother. I was halfway up and panic set in and I pushed back as hard as I could. I eventually woke up and panted, terrified. I never gave in to it again. It's lessened over the past few years, but every year or so it will come back. When I lived in the hideously awful and seriously haunted house, when I was about 22, I noticed my cell phone's messages light blinking. I checked it, and the mechanical voice said, "You have one new message from..." And there was 10 seconds of silence. No phone number recited. The message started without further introduction. It was a friend of mine, and she sounded happy, relieved, and more relaxed than I'd heard her voice in the last year. "Hey Coom, it's Nicole. I'm in the normal place waiting for you. I'll be there for a while, so whenever you want to come around." And then she signed off and hung up. I immediately called her back, but I got no answer. She'd left for 3-week vacation in New York 2 days before and had told me that she would not have her phone. She was leaving it at home because she did not want to deal with roaming charges anyways. I was worried. Why in the world would she be home already? But it was her. I called her roommate, who was equally concerned since she had not seen her in 2 days. "Her phone's right here," she said. It had been left behind because Nicole would only be roaming the whole time anyways, and did not want the charges. But I can call her cousin. She hung up on me and called our friend's cousin and spoke to my friend, who was fine. A bit distracted, melancholy as usual, but was having a relatively good time, and undeniably in New York. We had no normal place. We rarely met at the same place twice. We're far more often, in fact, to run into each other at a random place on the street. And she swore she'd never call me. I had a terrible head for numbers and would have to write mine down and remember it. Never figured that out, but about 6 weeks later, my boyfriend and I decided that our phone needed to be replaced. It had gone off again, no ring but a message. And just like before, it did not give a number. I listened to it for about 30 seconds, feeling goosebumps rise over my entire body, before I passed it to my boyfriend and watched him go white as a ghost. He listened for a while, and before saying, "Coom, what the fuck?" and setting it to speakerphone, we sat there in total silence, shivering as it played out. The message was almost 17 minutes long, longer than I thought a phone could record. It was a recording of a voice humming a sweet tune, wondering as if she was cleaning or cooking or doing some other thoughtless task. It was a familiar melody, though nothing I could name. The message ended abruptly with a little happy laugh. 4 notes, low to high. The voice and the laugh were undeniably my own. In my late teens, I had nightmares quite frequently. That may not be the most accurate term, but it fits me. They were semi-lucid dreams so far as I knew. I wasn't awake, but I couldn't control what was happening. The nightmares were always different experience, but I had the same objective in each one: to save as many people as I can from what was happening. People around me would be dying from a fire or being shot, or a wild animal would be killing them, and I would have to sacrifice myself to try to save them. The thing was, there was always this thing in my dreams with me. Once it was a doctor with no face, another time it was a bear. I even remember it being the front door to a house once. Whatever it was, it always had that same foreign feeling. I don't think I created it in my mind. I honestly think it came in. It would always be in the wrong place at the wrong time and hinder my objective in the nightmare. This thing would ensure my nightmare took the worst turn possible. Then I would get sacrificed in some way and die. I would not wake up like you normally do with the bad thing get you, though. It would continue until I experienced my own death, pain included. Then I'd stand up, maybe as a ghost, I don't know. I still don't even quite understand how or why. And just have an overwhelming need to scratch myself. I'd claw at my leg or my back or my face, and the dream would end shortly after that. The next morning, I'd wake up from scratch marks on my body where I'd scratch myself in the dream. Always freaking me out, but then the dreams went away. Then one night, I had a really bad one. I couldn't die. I couldn't scratch an itch, and I was getting afraid. My wife, girlfriend at the time, tried waking me up. She says I just would not wake up, but I was crying. I vividly remember her waking me up, and me being unable to move with a giant shadow looming over our bed. I don't think I'll ever forget feeling the helplessness. I told her about it the next morning and came clean about the scratches. She had asked them about before. After that night, though, I did not have that dream anymore. They just went away. Last year, I found out my wife had talked to her father at the church, who agreed to come to our apartment and bless the place. I guess he spent 45 minutes in the bedroom, and she said she had an uneasy feeling the whole time. I can't say it was paranormal, and just not my imagination and me scratching myself in my sleep. But the piece that just bugs me so much is him blessing our place without my knowledge and the nightmares going away after that. I'm not exactly a religious man, but what the actual fuck? That was 10 of the scariest experiences people have had in their life that they believed was attributed to the paranormal. If you enjoyed today's video and topic, make sure you smash that like button and press the subscribe button. Midnight Monster releases daily videos, so make sure you stick around as plenty of topics are coming.